Hello, everybody, and welcome to the latest episode of Super Paranormal Chronicles. Today, we are doing something completely different. We are talking to Robert Bitto, who's an author, and he specializes in everything to do with Mexico. So, Robert, good evening and welcome.
Well, thanks for having me.
Yeah, and I think we can thank Joe for putting you and me in touch with each other, swapping guests and all that.
Yeah, that's always good.
Yeah. So before we go into the books that you've written, can you kind of just give us a little bit of a background about yourself, please?
Okay, well, I started a business in 1999, which I still own, where I import arts and crafts from Latin American countries with an emphasis on Mexico. And so, in order for me to get the really good stuff, I have to go to small towns and out of the way places. And I'm always going to different locales to find really good stuff. And so over the course of my travels, I kept stumbling upon weird stuff, interesting stories, legends, um, different strange things that I knew were not being talked about in the English speaking world. And I got the idea for my YouTube channel, Mexico Unexplained, when I was on a plane from Guadalajara to Phoenix. And I was settling down in my seat with a magazine called Muy Interesante. And it's a Spanish language, Mexican produced paranormal magazine, basically. And they talk about different anomalies and weird science and things like that. And I was thumbing through the magazine and I saw an article about crop circles. And there were interesting crop circles that I had never seen before. And there were Mexican scientists who were analyzing these crop circles and commenting on them. And I thought, geez, you know what? I haven't seen this in the States, and I haven't seen a lot of the things that I've stumbled across on my various travels and adventures in Latin America. And I thought maybe there's some interest in bringing these obscure factoids, legends, myths, stories, anomalies, assorted paranormal stuff. Maybe there's an interest in bringing that to the English speaking world, taking it out of Mexico, and in some cases, very isolated regions of Mexico. Some of the things that I talk about, people outside the region who are Mexican have never even heard of the stuff that
Wow.
I'm talking about. So that's how Mexico Unexplained got started almost 10 years ago. And there is a never ending supply of material. So I think I can be doing this for another 10 years plus. So that's the background here. It
Cool.
started with my business, which I still own.
Yeah, and that sounds really cool because I can imagine there's quite a few different kind of artifacts and items that you are in touch with on a regular basis.
Mm-hmm.
And is what I've been writing thinking? Well, I know that the the Mexican culture is completely different, and they even celebrate is it the Day of the Dead?
Yeah.
I,
That's a huge holiday. In fact, October is my highest selling month for my business because I sell all of the crafts and all of the supplies that you need to celebrate that holiday. And yeah, there's a lot surrounding that holiday. It has very deep roots, like a lot of the things in Mexico. And there there are tons of stories that go back thousands of years. Because when the Spanish arrived, they met intact, living, breathing cultures that had an unbroken history going back millennia. And so some of these stories are that old. I mean, some of uh, especially the cryptids, the legendary creatures, a lot of those go back 3 to 4 thousand years.
wow, that's amazing. And yeah, I know that the culture of Mexico has got different cryptids than the USA, Canada, that kind of thing. So I know that the most famous is the Chupacabra.
Right.
So if you can explain a little bit about that cryptid for me.
It's a relatively recent cryptid. It started to appear, or at least appear on the radar, let's say, in the mid 1990s. And that was a result of actually a Cuban American television show hosted by, or a television show hosted by a Cuban American woman named Christina. And on the Christina show, she talked about the chupacabra, which was mostly seen in Puerto Rico. Okay. And it has different descriptions. Sometimes it's described as being a reptilian creature, and a lot of times it's described as being shaggy, furry, like a big dog or a big cat. And either way it's described, its behavior is the same. It sucks the blood out of animals, farm animals. So what happened is on the Christina show, she talked about it. And then all of a sudden in Mexico, there were all of these sightings, and reports of this creature appearing. Now, did the show cause people to see things, or did the show give people permission to finally talk about it without being ridiculed? So there was a big question there. It could be a creature that's always been there but hasn't been talked about that much, but it rose to prominence in the late 90s, and sightings continued to occur, and variations on the creature too. There have been recent sightings in a northern town called Lerdo, and I did a show called the Lerdo Monster, and it was very similar to the Chupacabra, but yeah, the Chupacabra has been around for 30 something years, at least on the radar, at least known to people. But yeah, that's one of the interesting creatures. There are a couple of blood sucking creatures that are out there besides the chupacabra. One
Yeah.
of them, which is a really, really interesting story, is called the Tlahuelpuchi. Now, off air, you had mentioned that some of these names of these creatures are kind of hard to say because a lot of them are in the native languages of down in
Right.
Mexico. And the Tlahuelpuchi, that comes from Nahuatl, which is the language of the Aztecs. And it's still a living language. In fact, there are more people who speak that language now than there were at the time of the conquest because there are more people. There are like 1.2 million people who speak that language. But the Tlahuelpuchi is a vampire witch that sucks the blood and is a shapeshifter. And how this came to be known was in the tiny state of Tlaxcala in central Mexico. There was a young functionary who was working in the records department in the capital city of Tlaxcala City, and he was processing death records. And there were a lot of infant deaths, and the cause of death was written on these death certificates as chupado por la bruja, which means sucked by a witch. That was the cause of death. And so
Wow.
this young man who wanted to make a name for himself, he noticed all this stuff, went to his supervisor and said, "Look, I have all of these death certificates and this is the cause of death. What's going on?" So then the state government sent people to these very rural, remote areas in the smallest state of Mexico. It'd be the equivalent of the American Rhode Island. Okay. And so the government sent people to investigate, and then they said, well, yeah, the baby is dead in his crib, and it was because of the Tlahuelpuchi and, chupado por la bruja, sucked by the witch. Because what this creature supposedly does, it's a woman, actually, a witch, who can shapeshift. And there are several different types of witches in Mexico, and the story is always the same. It's a marginalized woman who is cast out by the town. she was weird. She may have been ugly or whatever. So then she turns to the dark arts, right? And then she's going to, like Carrie at the prom, she's going to get back at people.
Right.
So in the case of the Tlahuelpuchi, it's a woman, a witch, who then shapeshifts into a wide variety of creatures. And usually it involves taking off a body part, like taking off her leg and then leaving the leg in the 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 hut or the house where she is. And then she'll turn into a bird or something. And in order to get into the house of the intended victim, a lot of times the Tlahuelpuchi will shapeshift into a flea or a little fly and fly in the keyhole or fly in a crack in the window and then appear above the baby, and then go after the kid. And so that's the legend. And so if you mention the word Tlahuelpuchi, before this happened, nobody really even knew about it except for those people in those villages in that tiny town, that tiny state of Mexico in Tlaxcala. And even now, people in the whole country of Mexico, if you mention the word Tlahuelpuchi, they won't even know what you're talking about. So that's an obscure legend, and anthropologists believe that that legend goes back 2 to 3,000 years. So, yeah.
Yeah. And just for the record, that was one of the names that I knew I was going to have trouble pronouncing. But now that you've said it a few times, Tla- Tlahuelpuchi.
Yeah, that was good. That was good.
Yeah,
Yeah,
my
very
first
good.
attempt. I'll get 8 out of 10 for that because I did stuff. But just sticking with kind of the women kind of cryptids and creatures, I think this one's a little bit easier for me to say. The La Llorona.
Well, the two L's in Spanish is pronounced like a Y.
Okay.
So that's Llorona. And that comes from the word in Spanish llorar, which means to cry. So the Llorona is a weeping woman. And this one, a lot of people ask me, do you have any personal connections to any of these, anomalies, creatures, whatever, UFO landing sites, whatever it is? Do you have any connections to any of these? And this one is close to my heart, believe me. The Llorona. I thought I saw her when I was 10 years old with a bunch of other little kids. And I grew up in New Mexico. And so New Mexico is an extension of Latin America, really. And, it was under Spanish domination from the 1590s with a brief interruption when the Pueblo people revolted. But from the late 1600s until the Americans acquired that part of the American Southwest, it was Spanish and then for 25 years Mexican, but it was part of the same cultural tradition. So it's a legend in Mexico and other parts of Latin America, and it starts off with a beautiful woman, and she has a dashing, handsome husband who is either a member of the nobility, the old Spanish nobility, or he's a military guy. And he goes off and he gallivants, right? And in the town, they talk about how he's a womanizer and stuff. And the woman knows that she's being cheated on and wants to get revenge on her husband. So she takes two of her children, or she takes her two children, a boy and a girl. It's always a boy and a girl in the legends. And she goes to the river and throws the kids in the river. And the kids are screaming for help because the water is rushing so fast. And the woman has regrets in the last moments and wants to save her children. So now, according to the legend, this ghost, this apparition, the Llorona, walks the arroyos, walks the acequias, the waterways in the Southwest and in Mexico, because there's a lot of irrigation in these very dry areas. She wanders these waterways looking for kids to snatch. Well, it's a cautionary tale. When I was a little kid, we used to play in the arroyos. They were ditches, basically. There were dry creek beds. And like the weather in New Mexico and northern Mexico, there can be a rainstorm, a huge thunderstorm miles and miles away, and you could be playing in the sunshine. And I've seen this happen where I was on the edge of an arroyo once as a kid, and the water just, a wall of water just rushed down, right?
Wow.
So this can be a cautionary tale to keep kids away from water because of flash floods. And
Yeah.
in fact, in the city of Albuquerque, they posted signs at the arroyos that said, ditches are deadly, stay away. And there was a ditch witch. They called her the ditch witch, but everybody knew it was the Llorona.
Yeah.
So back to my personal thing, uh, I I was part of my fifth grade class. We were going to the teacher's swimming pool. We're going over to the teacher's house to go swimming. And because the school system is very poor there was no money for a school bus. So we had to take the city bus. We had to take a couple buses. And between bus stops, we had to cross an arroyo. And so we were crossing the arroyo, me and the other kids. So it wasn't just me. There are other witnesses, not just me. We're
Always a good thing.
we were crossing over the arroyo and we looked down and there was an old woman there. And one person, one of the kids, I remember David Ortega, he yelled out, "It's La Llorona, La Llorona." And we all looked and we saw this old lady dressed in black in the middle of the arroyo. Then we took off. We like screamed. We ran and laughed because we couldn't believe what we saw. We like stumbled over each other. It was, I've never run so fast in my life. And we were, like I said, laughing. And it's like, well, could that have been her, really?
Yeah.
And I told this story once. I was on a show that was hosted by a medium, a very sensitive woman, and she said, she sensed children. That's why she did that. And I said, well, yeah, that would go along with the legend. That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't stop there, this weird connection that I have with this. It goes beyond that, even to the present day, the present month. This legend is connected to me. Okay. So there was a movie in 2019 called The Legend of La Llorona. Okay. And I bought tickets to the first showing because I thought, yay, I'm going to go see this movie. So I get my popcorn. I'm all nice and comfy in my seat. And I look up, and about 10 minutes into the movie, what? I'm looking up and I'm looking at my own merchandise from my business that I only carry myself. And it's in the movie. And then in another scene, it's there too. And there's more that I only make, that is only made for my business. And then I remembered that like 9 months before, I had a big order of merchandise from a studio in Burbank, California. And I was to send it care of the movie called The Children. And I guess it was a working title.
Yeah.
So it's strange. I was sitting there and I was watching my own merchandise in the movie about this thing. Okay. Now, that was 2019. Now, here we are in 2025, and I told you there's a weird connection too. Now, I moved to Western Nebraska. Okay, I know that's kind of weird. I moved from San Diego to Western Nebraska just 6 weeks ago. And the name of the street I'm living on, where I have my house, is the name of that arroyo that I crossed when I was in New Mexico as a 10-year-old. It's the same name, Han, Hahn, Han, the Han Arroyo, and I live on Han Avenue. It's so weird.
That
So
is weird. That is bizarre. That really is.
Yeah, but I was freaking out when I was in the movie theater because I knew that was my merchandise because it was only made for me and nobody else carries it. And then I remembered, like I said, months and months before, I got a purchase order from studio. So, yeah, so that's my personal connection.
That that's pretty good kudos. So, in all fairness, yeah, to have stuff that you've actually held and sold to be in a movie.
Yeah.
Like, what are the chances of that?
Yeah, it was so, and
Yeah,
and that movie, you know, and
yeah,
then when I got this house here in little town, there are 22,000 people who live in this town, okay? And I moved here because I thought this is like paradise compared to where I lived before, Southern California. It's not what it used to be. But then I realized, wait, that's the same name of that arroyo that where we saw the Llorona.
oh, there's bound to be another connection soon. You just know
Oh
it's going
no.
to happen.
And you know what? Here's something else. I am 15 minutes walking distance from the South Platte River. And I was walking along that river and I like chuckled to myself and I thought I better not come out here at night because I just might get snatched and no one will ever see me
Yeah.
again or something.
So all you have to remember about running, you don't have to be the fastest. All you have to be is fastest than the slowest person. That's all you have
Exactly.
to remember. Okay, so let's. Yeah, you're probably going to laugh at me saying some of these names, but at least I've got the longest name correct. So the next one is Huizotl. Is that correct? Did I say that correct? A
Mm,
mythical creature with a monkey-like head and a dog's body. Ahuizotl.
Huizotl, yeah. That's one of the Aztec monsters. Yeah, so there are quite a few monsters that combine, men, like a man and a goat and different parts like that. And so that's part of the Aztec mythology and
Okay,
anything that is Aztec like that or even the gods themselves, there are various stories about each creature. And there was one emperor named Ahuizotl who was named after a lake monster, their Loch Ness monster, although Ahuizotl. He wanted to standardize the religion and the myths and stuff like that. So, yeah, he wanted to come up with an official canon for all of these
right.
gods and creatures and things. And it was ironic that he was named after this Loch Ness monster creature in the lake that some people believe was a real creature. So, yeah.
Well, people believe that Loch Ness is real. Yeah. Yeah. Until you can 100% prove its existence, everyone's going to be thinking, yeah, is it real? Is it not real?
Well, I had a problem with the Loch Ness monster when I was a kid. I was. It's supposed to be a dinosaur, but isn't Scotland cold? I mean, dinosaurs are cold blooded. They're only supposed to be living in tropical areas.
So I've got a theory for that. We have a lake monster in Canada. I
Ogo
think it's
Pogo, isn't
Algopogo. So what I think it is, because of all the waters are connected, it goes to Scotland in the summer under the muse of Loch Ness, and then it comes back to Canada just on vacation. So
it?
that's my theory.
Maybe a vacation's in Mexico. Hey.
Maybe, yeah. Who knows? So, do you have any particular favourites that you like talking about?
Well, beyond the Llorona, there's also one of my favorites is the Lechuza, which is a gigantic owl creature. And why that's a favorite of mine is because when I put the show out, when I put the YouTube show out about this, the comments section blew up with people who were contributing their own experiences, which made me believe that this creature could be real. So once again, it's a witch. Okay, according to the legend, it's a witch that, marginalized woman, scorned, all that stuff. And then she turns into a gigantic owl and goes and kills livestock, takes your dog, attacks your kid. And there are different ways you can ward it off. And if you shoot it, then it falls to earth and turns back into a woman. But it's a gigantic owl, basically. And its habitat is northern Mexico and the Rio Grande Valley of Texas. I had a viewer even offer to take me on a Lechuza hunt if I were ever in the South Rio Grande Valley of Texas, because this person said that they've seen these creatures many times. And you know what? People don't People have different views about Mexico, and they don't realize what a vast country it is. There's a lot of empty space there, and there is a lot of rugged wilderness, a lot of inaccessible mountains, and I don't know. There could be a gigantic bird creature there. And yeah, if you go to the YouTube show about the Lechuza, you'll read the comments, and some of them are amazing. One of them was from someone from Southern California. And it's funny because there used to be a nuclear reactor. I don't know who the genius was who decided to put a nuclear reactor in an earthquake country, but the San Onofre nuclear plant. And some guy said that when he was a kid, they used to see the Lechuza hanging around there, and his father said that it was a regular owl that ate radioactive rats, and that's why it grew so big. But but it is a legend that goes deep into Mexican history. And so this is really intriguing to me because I think it could actually be a real creature. So I don't know.
Yeah. And talking about shapeshifters, the other one that I've got in front of me, the El Nagual.
Oh, the Naqual. Yeah.
See, I was
That's
close.
Yeah, that was good. Yeah. You're doing well. We're gonna have you speaking Nahuatl pretty soon here.
Okay, that sounds like a plan.
Yeah, that is a very, very old shapeshifter, and it's a sorcerer. This time it's not a woman, it's a man. It's a sorcerer like the shaman of the village, let's say. And at night he will change into this snarling, half canine, half feline creature, and go around and cause mayhem and everything. And the whole idea of the Nahual in the late 60s and 70s, Carlos Castaneda's books talk about it as being like an alter ego or something. And that was never really traditionally Mexican. It was always this, shape shifting sorcerer. And you can see in some of the codexes, the bark paper books that were made before the Spanish conquest, you can see pictures of the Nahual in these books that date back, 1500 years or whatever. So, yeah, there have been depictions of, these creatures going way back. In fact, the Bigfoot creature, one of the Bigfoot creatures, did you know there was a Bigfoot in Mexico? A lot of people don't know that.
I was going to ask you that. That was going to be my when you started talking. I wonder if there's a Bigfoot in Mexico.
Well, there are two Bigfoot creatures, but there's a counterpart to everything. There's a Bermuda Triangle. We briefly touched on the Ahuizotl, the Loch Ness monster creature. And yes, there are two Bigfoot creatures. And one of them is in the jungles of southern Mexico, the states of Chiapas, Campeche, Quintana Roo, and Yucatan. And it's kind of a shy forest creature, and it was first described by the outside world in the 1870s, I believe. Some miners had stumbled on the creature, and then the most famous sighting that got the Sisamite uh, worldwide attention was a circus worker from Canada this trapeze artist. He went down to Central America to seek his fortune, and he was in a tent and was woken up by this creature. But the creature has an Aztec name. Sisamite comes from Tzitzimitl, which means demonic creature. Okay. But it's not a bad guy. Okay. It comes, that's the Aztec name for it. The Maya believe that it was a creature of the forest with magical powers like a jaguar. They believe that the jaguar, deer, any of the forest creatures had a bit of magic attached to them. And they believe that the Sisamite was just a forest creature. So that's that Bigfoot. There are two. The other one is called the Quatlacas, and that's the big, buff, hairy, mean, angry Bigfoot that's akin to the North American Bigfoot that you would find in the Pacific Northwest. And a lot of people don't know because of Clint Eastwood movies about, dusty Mexico or whatever. A lot of people think Mexico's either a big desert or it's full of fun resorts on the coast.
Yeah.
But there are 3 or 4 mountains that have glaciers on them, permanent snowpack. And Iztaccíhuatl is a big mountain that's near Mexico City. Iztaccíhuatl and Popcatepetl. Now say those 10 times fast. Those, when Popo, we'll shorten it from Popocatépetl, from when Popo is not erupting, it has snow on it, but Iztaccíhuatl next to it always has permanent snowpack. And there are other mountains that have permanent snowpack. And there are people who are part of alpine rescue in these national parks who are trained in Switzerland, Mexicans who are trained in Switzerland in alpine rescue. Okay.
Wow.
That's how hardcore this is, these glaciers, right? And people are hiking in these glaciers all the time and they see this big hairy creature. And also in the forests, see, once again, it's not a dusty Clint Eastwood movie. Unending forests, especially in the northern part of the state of Puebla, that's like the heart of the Cuatlacas territory. And only stories were coming out in the 60s when humans were starting to encroach onto the territory of the Cuatlacas and started to do illegal logging. And in one case, there were some illegal loggers that went up there with their truck and started cutting down trees. And then they camped for the night. And then there was all of this noise in the middle of the night and like crashing sounds. And one of the Cuatlacas supposedly took a log and threw it at the truck and completely disabled the truck and smashed it to bits. And the people there had to be extracted by forestry officials and were arrested because they were, cutting down trees illegally. But there have been a lot of other sightings since then because as the population increases, then people are encroaching on the habitat of this creature. So you don't want to mess around. The Sisamite, the other Bigfoot's more shy. He's skinny. He's tall but skinny and has 4 fingers. I forgot to mention that. But the Quatlacas, it's the big buff Bigfoot that you don't want to mess with. And you know what? There's a figurine, the Olmecs, who their territory, they're supposedly the mother civilization of Mexico, the first complex civilization to emerge. And there is a sculpture called the Olmec ape. And scholars believe that it's a rendition, it's a carving of the Bigfoot creature that they used to see in the forest. So, yeah, it's not a new sighting. I think these creatures have been hiding recently, but they can't hide anymore because of human encroachment.
Yeah.
So, I don't know. You can be skeptical and say, where's the body and all of that. And I'm right there with you. I'm right there with people who want more proof. But yeah, these really are interesting stories nonetheless.
That's it. And that's what I love about doing these kind of podcasts because, before tonight, apart from the Chupacabra, which I can say because I've said it many times, there's loads more cryptids that I never knew existed. So it's all good for my knowledge base to, even though I can't say them, I kind of kind of know what they are. But Mexico is not just famous for its own cryptids. There's a lot of uh, other mystery, like there's a lot of UFO activity in Mexico as well. And I believe that your second book, Mexico Unexplained, covers UFOs in that one.
Yeah, there's some. Yeah, I do talk about some UFOs and other like alien encounters and stuff like that. One of the first abduction experiences ever recorded was in Mexico in the 1950s. It was a cab driver, and his name was Salvador Villanueva Medina, and he was near the border with the United States, and he was driving his cab around, and his cab broke down. And then two people approached his car, and they were in UFO lore. They would be considered the Nordics, okay, the tall blonde, And this cab driver just thought they were gringos. Oh, well,
Sure.
they're just Americans, right? And so the two Nordics who encountered this broken down cab said, "Would you like to come to our ship? We'll show you," or whatever. So he got out of the cab and went, into the desert a little bit, and there was a saucer that was there. And then so they took him aboard. So it's not technically an abduction because he went willingly. And there are a lot of stories like that. There was a teenage girl who went willingly. It was at an Air Force base. That's an interesting story. Whew. But this very first case, it was like 1954, I believe. Then they took him aboard, and then later he wrote a book called Estuve en el planeta Venus, meaning I was on the planet Venus, because he thought he was being taken to Venus. And if you know a lot about UFO history, in the 50s, people thought that Venus was inhabited and that the Venusians were visiting us. So he, with the help of some other people, ghostwriters or whatever, he wrote this book describing, the craft, the flight over there, what he saw on Venus, all of this stuff. So, that was an interesting case. And then the other one, there was uh, an Air Force base and a teenage girl who was the daughter of one of the Air Force personnel stationed there. And she woke up in the middle of the night, and their house was at the edge of the base, and there was this craft hovering over the it was hovering over the ground. And then these people came out of it, and she thought they were gringos. And I don't know if you would consider them Nordic because they were just Caucasian. And some people believe that either this was NASA project from the Americans or it was a Russian, because this happened like in 1970. And some people believe that it could have been the Soviet Union. And the way she described the people, they could have been Eastern Bloc people, from
Yeah.
the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia, Poland, the Eastern Bloc. So some people are thinking that this could have been an experimental craft sent by either the Americans or the Soviets. And she went on board and they talked to her and everything, and she felt like she didn't move anywhere. And so I don't know, it could have been some sort of experimental thing, or it could have been, from some other world or another dimension or whatever. But that was a really interesting case because she went into great detail about what they told her and what the future would be like, and and all of this stuff. So, but there are a lot of different stories. There's some stories about UFOs crashing. In fact, on one of my buying trips, I was in the back country of the state of Michoacan or Jalisco. I think, yeah, it was Jalisco. And whenever I do these trips, I usually contract with local drivers who have trucks and stuff. So, I can have somebody there and take me to these places with their own vehicle, and then we can load up the truck and then go back to a main city. And, then I have it, palletized and sent out or whatever. But I'll take little trips out into the country, and we were driving along and we stopped in this town and there was all this hubbub and everything, all this commotion. What's going on? And outside the town, there was a landing site. There was a UFO landing site in some farmer's field. And I said to the driver, let's go. And the guy who owned the field was charging admission. So it was like 50 pesos or something, like a couple bucks or whatever. They're really capitalistic down there, like, and so we drove by and to talk about the whole capitalism thing, people were selling balloons and food to eat and stuff like that. So this, like, they came out of nowhere to sell stuff and everything. This whole thing, it was like this big pop-up thing. And so the driver, I'm like, yeah, let's go and all this stuff. But he was afraid of the radiation. He said, I don't want to go because there could be radiation. So I was like, darn, I had my opportunity to go, but he didn't want to go. But yeah, there have been, that wasn't the first time that I've heard of that sort of thing, that there have been landing sites and stuff, or even crashes. And the crashes always have retrieval. And the retrieval is usually by the gringos, by the Americans.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot there.
Yeah. If I'm driving down a road and I break down and two people come up to me and say, do you want to come for a look around my ship? Hell no. Like, oh, is that? Yeah, I'm going to walk back now. Thanks. Like, I'm all good. But one thing that I have kind of noticed when I've been reading up on things happening in Mexico, Popo is very popular for UFO sightings. There seems to be a lot around. Is it Popcatepetl?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was good. See, we're getting you on track here for speaking Nahuatl. Yeah, in fact, there was a morning show that was like their Good Morning America, and they were showing how Popocatépetl was erupting. And so there were puffs of smoke coming out of this, and people were eating their breakfast all across Mexico watching this morning show, and they were talking about the volcano slowly coming to life. And then all of a sudden, this metallic disc darted out of the volcano, and millions of people saw it. And here's another thing, too. With that volcano and with other volcanoes, because there's a lot of UFO activity around volcanoes, you can go to a website called Webcams de Mexico, and there is a webcam that constantly is pointing at Popo and these other places. And you have people who are spotting things, but in this live feed, in front of it was on that morning show, and then, like, wow, it happened. But people believe in Mexico, there's a tradition that the volcanoes are portals to the underworld. And that's been believed for thousands of years among the indigenous, the original civilizations. And so it almost has a 21st century twist that these UFOs are coming out of these craters. So, yeah.
Interesting. So we are coming to the end, unfortunately, but like I say, you blow my mind with especially with some of these names, because there's no chance that I'm ever going to be able to pronounce them. Never in a month of Sundays am I going to be able to.
So well. You were doing great.
Yeah, on the smaller ones, not the big ones that you. So you've written your 3 books: Mexican Monsters, that we've already been discussing with the cryptids, Mexico Unexplained with your magic, your mysteries, and UFOs, Mexican Miracles, Virgin Saints and Shrines of Mexico. So, what's next for Robert Bitto?
What I'm working on now is a history book. So, what I'm doing is I'm compiling obscure history stories, and that book should be out in the next few months. So, I'm really close to finishing that one.
So,
I try to
are
get a
you?
book out every couple month or a couple years, and there's also a companion to Mexican Monsters. There's a coloring book for the kiddos and for any adult colorers out there. So you can see the creatures and you can color them any way you want.
That's pretty cool. So, anything else on the pipeline after this next book?
No, it's steady as she goes with weekly shows. Every Sunday I drop a show, and like I said to you earlier, there's never ending material. There are stories that I've come across personally. There's research that I'm always doing. When I was in San Diego, I found a big stack at a garage sale of old pulp Mexican UFO magazines from the 70s. Gold, gold, gold.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so there's always stuff that I can talk about. So every Sunday I have that show, and that's going to continue.
That's awesome. Robert, I thank you for your time. It's been a lesson that I've enjoyed learning today. Like,
Well, great.
and I'm going to practice my Spanish. So if we talk again in the future, I'll be speaking fluent to you, and you'll be going, "You don't say it like that. You don't say it like this."
Well, I
But
think we should do a part two sometime. Yeah.
most definitely, I will definitely keep to that, my friend. Most definitely. But thank you for your time. It's been an
Thank you.
absolute pleasure. And as you've just said, we will definitely speak again. Thanks
Sounds
very
good.
much.
Thank you.
Take care.